All right, this is the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour for the week after Bellator 212, 213, UFC, and a bunch of other fights. Heavy December weekends. I'm here with Matt Hawkins and the return of Nolan King. What's up?
How's it
How
going,
you?
guys?
I'm all right.
What's up, fellas?
Good.
So, I mean, we need an extra pair of eyes, Nolan. And I know you were watching everything the way we were. It's hard to keep up with everything. So, Nolan King writes for FloCombat, Tapology, and a bunch of other places. Seems to be the way of the business now. So, what did you guys get to catch?
So you don't mind me going first, Matt. Sorry to cut you off, but for me, I had the quadruple screen going at one point. I had Invicta up, I had Bellator up, I had the UFC up. I would be lying if I said I watched more than a couple seconds of the boxing. I saw like the finish with Canelo, but really didn't watch much of that card other than catching the replay of the TKO there. But yeah, I tried to catch as much as I can. I mean, there's only two eyes, and I can only look at one place at a time. But I think that I did a pretty good job considering we had four major MMA events and a major boxing event this past weekend.
Yeah, that was the same way. My living room looked like a Walmart department store with I had four big screens going with about the same thing going on. I think I even have the Laker game on my iPad. So I had everything covered. But basically it started Friday night with Bellator 212, the Salute to the Troops event. I know some people had some issue with the pacing of the event, but from an overall entertainment value of the fights, I thought it was a hell of a card. And in this day and age, being a free card, I thought it was some solid fights.
Yeah, I know Nolan and I also we had commented back and forth about the pacing of the event. I mean, I almost felt bad after because obviously the reason they were doing was for the troops in the USO thing, but it did feel like I was watching a UFC event on FS1 because of the pacing, and I mean I don't remember being up past midnight watching the fights. Usually, unless I'm there, no one can speak on it too. I mean, unless we're there covering it, it's usually when we're up later than that.
Yeah, usually if we're covering it, that's Krispy Kreme time. That's not we're not sitting in the arena watching fights still. That was brutal, man. I think that was worse than the FS1 pacing. I bit my tongue for the first, when it was those first 2 hours. We only saw two fights in the first 2 hours of the programming. Obviously they're paying tribute. They're trying to do a good thing, and I guess you can't really have too much of a good thing, but at the same time, you got to cut it at some point. I mean, people, you got to weigh the ups and the positives and negatives of trying to promote something good, but then also at the same time turning people off because they don't want to stick around. And I can't blame them necessarily, to see 5 fights in 4 hours on late on a Friday on the East Coast. I know it was to the point where it was getting late on the West Coast even for that one. So with that being said, I think it was a good event for Bellator, obviously being in Hawaii. They had stars, Hawaiian stars were born, and Liam McFarlane, that was. I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself, but overall, I think Bellator's got to be pretty happy. Maybe they can just learn from the pacing that was going on there. But other than that, I mean, there wasn't much that we could complain about as fight fans from their two events this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I get spoiled here on the West Coast. I usually get the earlier start time. Obviously, it was a 10. It was more of a UFC start time for you guys. It was a 10 p.m. Eastern. Normally, Bellator is either a 8 or 9 o'clock start time for their larger events. So obviously that's an issue. For me, it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, I'm used to the Fox, like we said, this Fox Sports, and it's earlier for me. So it's not like I'm sitting here at midnight trying to keep my eyes open through another tribute. But overall, I just thought the events looked great. I thought the arena looked cool. I liked how they had the I don't know if it's a hula stuff, but the way they had the stage.
Oh yeah,
set
like
up.
the grass skirt.
There you go. Yeah, all that stuff. I just thought it looked great. I thought it really added a dimension to MMA that we don't get a lot. Occasionally we get it in Japan, but in the United States, I feel like we just get so stale. We get great fights here, and it's not worth complaining about. As far as that goes, but just the show, obviously, like I said, coming from some of the old school stuff, and even the old school stuff, it's nostalgic, but it wasn't necessarily always over the top. But having the ramp and that was, I talked about going to see, I went to the Golden Boy event. So I went and saw Chuck and Tito. And for me, it was a little bit of a nostalgia, going back, seeing the intro for both of those guys. I went to UFC events when they had the ramp and they'd come out to Mask from Tap Out doing the Chuck Liddell intro and stuff like that. So I just think we need more of that. And I think Bellator did a great job really bringing in the Hawaiian influence. And, like you said about the stars, I mean, the first night, AJ McKee Jr., you can't really, I mean, that guy's a killer. I know he needs to step up in competition, but, there's not much better prospects in the world of MMA than that guy right now.
Yeah, not at all, man. I mean, they have to give him somebody a step up now. I wouldn't even complain if they honestly gave him a title shot. I know that's a big jump. At the same time, I think he's earned it. He's proven that he's way better than these guys that they're bringing in. The 7-1 guys, the 8-1 guys, things like that. So, I think he's ready to take the next step up. Him and Pitbull, that's a hell of a fight to promote. And then also, worst case scenario, McKee loses. He's still got so much, you can give him that middle ground in between the guy he fought last weekend and a Patricio Pitbull. Like, I don't think that would ruin his, trajectory or spoil a prospect or anything like that. So if I'm Bellator, I'm at least considering that fight, even though it might be a little bit of a jump for McKee.
Yeah, I think it's I think it wouldn't be a bad move, but it's probably something they want to look at maybe mid 2019, only because obviously with everything going on with I don't know, the landscape of the sport and the UFC switching from Fox to ESPN and just the way people are watching the way people are watching fights now. I feel like they have to figure out where their viewers are going to come from before they start making more title fights. So obviously they have the welterweight tournament that's going to go through. The heavyweight one will be done in January, and Coker said he wanted to do more. Back in October for when you and I were covering the end of that tournament, Nolan. So I don't know. By the way, thanks for giving me my due props for the Coker and Darren Caldwell thing.
Yeah,
a lot of people didn't watch that video. Only like 200 people watched it. But
yeah, no, I mean, I thought it was pretty awesome. I'm sure he got asked the same questions over and over again by people on that at the event you were at, and for you to kind of think outside the box and then not only to ask that question and get a cool answer, but then have the actual thing that was a little outside the box come true a couple months later. It's pretty cool, man. You were ahead of the curve.
Yeah, yeah. What's funny though? I mean, if you watch that whole video from beginning to end, he pretty much lays out the whole game plan that I feel like we're going to see more. I mean, not just the Bellator versus Ryzen thing, and I know I talked to Matt about it after I recorded it. But he talks about doing stuff because Matchroom Boxing is already with DAZN. He talks about doing submission-only grappling in the Bellator cage. And, Chael has the submission underground that we haven't seen a recent event from them. I wouldn't be surprised if they switched over. I know I'm speculating, but what do you guys think? I mean, you think that's a change we could see in 2019?
I mean, I think Scott Coker's open to a lot more than any other major MMA promoter has been open to ever, really. His willingness to take risks. I mean, this is a risk for Bellator. Regardless, I know he'll get a good rematch if Caldwell loses. Apparently, there's a rematch clause, but I think at the same time, it's a risky move. He's not. I don't know how much he's getting to gain out of this financially. I don't know what the terms of this type of deal was, but it's a bit of a risky move. From a fan's perspective. Where I don't know necessarily what Bellator really has to gain out of this, but it's opening a whole nother window of things down the line that, we could have crossovers where Ryzen fighters come to the U.S. or, all this other crazy stuff. So I give him props. I mean, with the tournaments, with the different signings that he made, from the blue chip wrestling prospects to, Jack Swagger going to debut in a couple months. I give the guy credit. He goes for it. He tries to be different, tries to be fun, and he still keeps, the whole aspect of fights where he has, these really top tier talent, guys that are top 10 in the world as well. So he's got a good balance, and he's got some balls, and I give him credit.
Yeah, I think it's a change that you have to do right now. I mean, the landscape of MMA, the bottom line is that viewership's gone down. I don't necessarily think that the popularity of the sport has gone down, but the numbers just don't seem to be there for any organization in general. I mean, I think the Fox UFC event this week did about 1.8 or something like that, and that's that's pretty paltry numbers for a network event or a network showing of any kind. So I think I think doing stuff like that, eventually you might hit gold, and Japan's been down for the last decade and a half with MMA, but we do know that when they get behind it, there is money there, and there is potential for an explosion. And, I think that you have Mayweather on the card. If that ends up going through in the next week, whenever, and on New Year's Eve, if that actually ends up and he ends up in the ring, I think you're going to end up with quite a lot of eyes, and maybe not necessarily all here in the United States, but you start getting Asia and some people that really could potentially start throwing money at something. And, and then on top of that, you see Horiguchi and Caldwell, and, all you got to do is create a big star in Japan. And that there's potential to all of a sudden somebody like Caldwell's, selling out a 60,000 seat, Saitama Arena. I mean, it's not out of the question for.
Matt, do we know where that's going to air yet? Or is that on Fight TV?
No.
I know people are asking. It seems like they haven't said anything.
Yeah, I made a post on the MMA community forum about 2-3 weeks ago saying that it just something doesn't seem right about it. The other events you could buy a month ahead of time. You could buy almost 2 months ahead of time. And I thought maybe it had to do with them adding a second event. Maybe they were working on the broadcast or how they were going to package a pay-per-view price together. And then obviously Mayweather being involved could throw a monkey wrench into it. He might not be so down to have, a 1995 pay-per-view with anything he's involved with. Even if it doesn't mean anything, he might see that as a price tag for him being, somehow downgrading his image. But I don't know. They gotta have something. I don't think we can be in 2018 going into 19 with the biggest Japanese event in the last.
Yeah.
I
reached out to, I sent an email to their PR folk, and I haven't gotten a response. I don't know if you've seen anything, Nolan. I know you get a lot of scoop.
Yeah, I thought somebody had posted about it the other day on Twitter. I don't really remember what I had read, but I did see something about where it was going to be broadcast or something. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what I saw. So. I guess my comment's kind of worthless at this point.
Yeah, I know. The rumor is Fuji TV in Japan is showing like a 5.5 hour block. So the event right now is scheduled to be about a 9-hour event. So they're talking. I see that for their live broadcast in Japan. I'm not as good as some of those other guys on Twitter with the streams and the VPNs and stuff. I think there's a way to order it through a Japanese pay-per-view called like Goyo or
yeah, but I'm not. That. I mean,
but people like exactly. Yeah. You're not gonna...
people that are going to tune in for this Mayweather tension fight aren't going to go through all that to watch. You know what I mean? Like Mayweather's kind of like a general draw for the casual fan. Anyone that hasn't heard of Rising is hearing about it because of this matchup. I would think. So, but anyway, I didn't mean to get off topic. It's just because I mean it's literally like 15 days away or whatever, and yeah, it really is. I'm going to be at the PFL thing at the Garden, so I mean, I'm not going to watch it, but I'd like to know where I could catch it after the fact. You know what I mean? So anyway, so many fights stood out from the weekend. I mean, we were talking about Bellator and both events. I don't know, fights to make after that. I mean, Liam McGeary got back on the win column on Saturday night. He knocked out King Mo. King Mo talking about changing weight. And then with the welterweight tournament, I know everybody counted Neiman Gracie out, except me. But yeah. So I don't know. I think he's a new favorite to win. What do you guys think?
I don't think he's a favorite to win, but I was super impressed with him.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of the best, not one of the best performances, but a performance that I didn't expect and came out of kind of nowhere. And it was cool to see real jiu-jitsu again kind of being used. And I mean, his constant threats from his back was cool. And I mean, I'm the first to say I thought the wrestler would be able to avoid the submissions. It really didn't dawn on me until I was watching the fight that all these fights are 5 rounds. I know the Lima Korshkov fight was, but that was almost like a championship fight because of the guys you had.
Yeah.
So when I all of a sudden you got into about the second round, you start seeing Ruth get tired, and I felt like, okay, well, this is where Gracie wants it to be. Gracie doesn't have to be super He doesn't have to have a bunch of energy to finish this fight. He just needs to get a really good position at some point in the next 3 rounds, whereas Ruth basically has to win by knockout. Or
I was surprised he got a takedown though. I mean that I know usually when you expect something different, someone does what you don't expect, it's easy to get something off. I mean, especially against really good wrestlers, when they go against really good jiu-jitsu guys, you'll see this too, like at beginner level, like guys that come from wrestling, they get caught in chokes a lot. So I think you're just seeing that at a higher level, you know, especially when you look at Aaron Pico's debut fight, and then you look at what happened with Ruth, because Ruth's a blue belt. He's not like it's not like he doesn't know anything about submissions. I think he's competed in some grappling tournaments. I've seen highlights on Flow Grappling. So, but yeah, I mean, he got those takedowns. So I was happy that he won, and I'm looking forward to the next brackets for the event. But the UFC event, obviously I don't know if that was under the radar. I wound up watching that and then catching the highlights for Bellator after, because I'm still fighting off this cold. But what did you get to watch it, Matt, or you had them both going? What fights stood out to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I had everything going. The way the timing kind of worked out, I was able to, eliminate it down to about 1 or 2 events at the same time. For me, it was a Bellator weekend. I watched the UFC, but I even commented on Twitter on somebody's post that, the Bellator fights felt like they meant something, at least going forward. The UFC fights obviously had Kevin Lee won, then we would have probably been looking at a number 1 contender, or at least right in the mix with that craziness in the lightweight division. But Ilima-Lei Macfarlane, a fantastic performance and a really good fight with Letourneau at Bellator. Javier Ayala stepped up, got a big win over Frank Mir.
Yeah, that was bad.
Machida in a real close fight with Carvalho. It was big for Bellator for him to get a win. I felt like, Chandler getting his belt back is one of the faces of Bellator. I think it's key that he holds the title. I think he's a really marketable guy that they could, if there is an explosion or if anything eventually comes, and we get to a point where there's a new, especially with the help of Japan, I think he's a good face to have. But yeah, the UFC card, I mean, there was some really good fights. Obviously the main 2, well, the ones that caught my attention was Charles Oliveira. I mean, I think he's a real underappreciated fighter. Obviously, a lot of times when people think he's about ready to take that next huge step, he loses. But the all-time leader in submissions, I know that's got to be close to your heart, Ed, but I just, the guy's an animal. I mean, I didn't expect him to do it like that to Jim Miller. I thought he would win, but I didn't expect it to go down like that. I mean, he basically did to Jim Miller what Jim Miller did to Gomi and just tore him up.
Yeah. No, I was about to ask you what you thought of the UFC card this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great from top to bottom. I mean, if you had taken those fights and scattered them throughout, a bunch of other cards and mixed and matched, like there were 3 or 4 fights on Saturday night that could have easily won fight of the night had it been on another card. It's just they're all competing against each other. I mean, it was getting to the point where it was getting so good. Like we forget about fights like Dan Ige versus Jordan Griffin. That was a really fun matchup with a lot of transitions, wacky positions on the ground. That was a phenomenal fight. And then the one that ended up winning fight of the night, Jared Gordon versus Joaquim Silva. Yeah. That was a barn burner, and the knockout at the end was brutal. I mean, when Joaquim got Gordon's leg behind his head and tore his hamstring and his knee up, like there was just a lot of really gory, brutal, good stuff that we love to watch in that one. So that was awesome. And then obviously, the Dan Hooker Barboza fight was a war. The main event was pretty solid within itself. So I thought that was a big win for the UFC. The last card on Fox. And then, as MMA fans were spoiled because, like Matt said, Bellator killed it as well. So, and it was nice too because the UFC was on a little earlier where the Bellator card was at least staggered. You know what I mean? When the main event ended for UFC, people that weren't watching Bellator could still switch over and see the 4 main card, the top 4 fights on the card. So I thought it was pretty, even though I had a lot of TVs and screens going at the same time, I thought it was, my attention could be mostly directed in one place at one time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing with with that start time and the finish time, I actually felt like really Fox, like UFC, like your last one on Fox, you figure out to put in a better start and end time that's actually convenient for one set. I'm not like having to run out and get iced coffee to watch the last few fights. But I heard, did Dan Hooker suffer a concussion in that fight or no?
Yeah, so that's what his coach said. I mean, I'm sure, taking the head trauma out of it, I'm sure his insides, I don't even know what his body must have felt like the next day, man. I mean, that was some gruesome stuff. I can't even. I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, liver shots hurt.
Oh. Yeah, and it was cool seeing Barboza get back on track. I mean, the guy's an exciting fighter. In our predictions, I actually picked Hooker. I thought maybe it was time for some kind of changing of the guard. I thought maybe the punishment that Barboza had taken by Lee and Khabib would catch up with him, but obviously I was wrong on that.
Yeah, we both were.
One of my favorite stats that I always throw at people, and I probably posted it on Twitter a couple times, is like, I think Edson Barboza is the most underrated fighter in the lightweight division. If you look at the lineup of the last dozen fights that he's had, they've been against guys that were in the top 10, top 7, or guys like Dan Hooker that were supposed to be, the next big thing. I mean, if you look at it, his last 12, I think, Cerrone, Evan Dunham, Bobby Green, Michael Johnson, Paul Felder, Tony Ferguson, Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, Beneil Dariush, Khabib, Kevin Lee, and Dan Hooker. That's a killer's row, man. And I mean, he has a winning record among those fighters too. He's one of the most underrated guys in the division. Like Matt said, it was awesome to see him get back on track because I think people forget how good he is sometimes.
What do you think about him and Justin Gaethje?
Oh, I love it. I mean, that would be phenomenal. I mean, just the leg kicks within themselves would would just make for an awesome matchup and two zombies.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that's the fight to almost make. You obviously don't want to. I think you got to. I don't think Barboza's ever going to be champion. I maybe if he gets lucky and he gets a last minute call into a fight and something kind of goes his way, but it's kind of proven that when he goes up against a big time wrestler, obviously that's his kryptonite. So I think the UFC just needs to be real smart with that guy, and he can still become a huge star by just the right matchups. It's too bad somebody like Eddie Alvarez is gone because that would have been a good fight.
What do you think of Puente? Do you like that matchup?
Yeah,
I saw we're touting that around.
I think that would be a good matchup, and it would make sense. I don't know. Al's kind of a weird. He's been so inactive that it's kind of hard to figure out where he fits in. I mean, if you look at the lightweights, I guess you go if unless there's some kind of super fight involving, I guess you got to go Khabib and Ferguson. I mean, that's the fight that makes the most sense.
Absolutely.
Connor Holloway is something that I would like to see. Holloway Nate Diaz is a fight that initially popped into my head immediately after watching it because a lot of people comparing Holloway to a Diaz who kind of takes everything as serious as possible and it's like what the Diaz could be if they were completely
but it's hard to sell a Diaz fight now because they always say I mean you hear it's happening and then they announce themselves that they're not doing it. I mean, especially lately with the 235 thing. So now it's just kind of like like now when you hear their name, I feel like it's not going to have the same draw because I mean, I don't know, maybe they made enough money that they really don't have to fight.
I think if they fought, I think it'll still be a huge draw. I think if you did like Diaz Holloway in Hawaii, I think it would be a huge draw. But I don't. But like you said, you can't really. Diaz didn't pull out of the last fight, though. I mean, I think that's what kind of we got to realize, at least as far as Nate goes. I mean, Poirier's the one who technically pulled out of the fight with an injury. So we got to kind of go with the assumption that if something wouldn't happen to Poirier, then maybe the fight would have happened. I mean, obviously, maybe doesn't get a lot of confidence, but historically, he's not known for pulling out of fights he at least signs for. I think the UFC's getting in the habit lately, and I don't know, maybe Nolan knows longer than I have, where they're announcing fights that aren't signed. I don't think that does anybody any good. I think that's what we're dealing with right now with Nick Diaz and Masvidal. It sounds like the fight's not even signed. It gets to you, Nolan, or the rumors start spreading, and then all of a sudden it comes out, well, nobody's actually signed the contract. It's just whoever starts the rumor spreading the rumor based off of what the UFC wants to happen, or one fighter really wants to happen. So
yeah, big time. I think the same thing's going on kind of with Covington and Woodley. You see them Dana was starting to throw Usman's name out there a lot. And I think there's a lot that goes on, but yeah, I mean, up until the last year or so, this was not something that I ever even saw like used. You know what I mean? There would be times where contracts would go out, and fighters, it seemed like, would be the ones that were difficult to deal with. You know, they'd get they'd verbally agree to something, and then I can't do it that date, and then it would get pushed off, or I want more money. But now it's the UFC that's the one that's doing it. They're it seems like they're shooting contracts off to both fighters, knowing that one guy did not agree to it yet, just kind of putting it in front of them, saying, "Oh, well, it's here if you want it." The other guy already signed. And I even noticed it with the lower level fights. There's been times, a couple times actually in the last few months where, I've got enough sources to say a fight's in the works, and both sides say, we haven't agreed on it yet. We haven't signed it. We'll let you know when we sign it. And then the UFC will slip it to, the Milwaukee newspaper. And then they'll be like, well, we didn't even get our contracts yet. This happened to me 2 or 3 times in the last couple of months where smaller fights, the UFC was announcing them, giving them out to the local newspaper saying, hey, this fight's set. And the guys were like, yeah, they told us we're getting our contract 3 days from now. So I don't know why they're doing it. If they're just trying to, I don't know. I guess they're trying to put some pressure on these guys to sign, but it kind of ends up, when it backfires, it makes everybody look bad. The fans don't get the fight they want. The fighters look like they turned down a fight, and the UFC look like they lied to everybody. So it's not a good deal.
When Joe Silva was around, we obviously gave the old Fertitas and Dana and Joe Silva, we always kind of gave him a hard time. It was what we had, and we always thought everything could be better. Well, now Joe Silva's gone. Do you think that is that causing a lot of this? Is the new UFC regime just not good at negotiating with people and making things happen? I mean, what do you think the main cause is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think certainly the Lorenzo Fertitta presence leaving seemed like a lot of the practices that the UFC, in terms of fighter relationships and kind of giving guys a little bit more respect when it came to the business as a whole, is kind of out the window. In terms of Joe Silva, I think the aspect of the whole signing process that I would say has been impacted most was, I honestly think he was more harsh on these guys in terms of making them sign. Like, if you don't sign this, you're going to get cut. Things like that. I heard a lot of stories from fighters saying that, he would totally chew them out on the phone if they even like said, oh, I'm hurt, or I have to push it off 3 weeks. Like, that he was a scary guy to deal with, and that Sean Shelby was a little bit more of a straight shooter in terms of, not trying to mess with the fighters in that regard or play mind games. So I don't know if that's had a the opposite effect where, back then, Joe Silva would have had these things, signed because of fear almost, to a certain extent. I think people didn't really want to mess with him, and that he was really good at his job, but at the same time, he was somebody that had a lot of power in the UFC, and a lot of the fighters were, definitely, if they turned down a fight, they were afraid they wouldn't get one for a while or get one ever. So that's really what I've heard mostly about Joe Silva, but I think most of it comes from the top down, even above Joe Silva, where Lorenzo Fertitta's gone, and that whole presence is out the window.
Yeah, I think that's that. I mean, I wonder if that is what has to do with everything happening, because, like you guys said, it's something we're seeing lately. When you were building your sources and confirming fights, you didn't have these issues of is this really happening or not. It seems to be happening lately, and I wonder if it is because obviously the people running the place aren't the people that we're seeing on TV. You know what I mean? Like I know Dana White's the president, but he answers to Ari Emanuel. And with the ESPN deal coming up, I mean, who knows what type of numbers they have to get preemptively before they switched over to ESPN. So maybe Scott Coker actually said that really good line at the Bellator press conference about them wasting all their good ammo or something along those lines. Yeah. So, and I think that's they're, like you said, they're so worried about pissing off Endeavor or WEME, IMG, whatever they call themselves now, that along with the ESPN folk, that they're just trying to get all the names announced to something to build up the hype before we even get to those dates.
Yeah, the other problem that I've seen a lot recently that, I think it's even obvious to people that don't get, hear rumblings or rumors or anything, is that the UFC used to be so far ahead of the game. Like, they used to have a full set lineup like two months in advance, and now they're scrambling for almost every card to get a main event. Some of them are falling off. Some of them are switching to free TV. I mean, they went years and years without having a pay-per-view cancellation, and now it's like every other year we have one of those, or they get moved to free TV. So I think that's part of it too. I don't know if it's too many cards or too many fighters or whatever, but it just seems like in terms logistically, they're always scrambling. Like there's always at least 2 fights that get added in the last like 4 weeks of of when a fighter should have camp. So I don't know if that's part of it too. They're just planning things later, but definitely that is an issue that I think causes a lot of problems, is that they don't plan far ahead enough. Like I guess part of the reason they've been doing that is because they would announce these cards in 3 months in advance, and then people would fall off and get hurt. Same time, I think it's better to have a set card and have to adjust than have no set card and have to adjust.
Yeah, I had the conversation with one of my relatives over the weekend about this, and I was, he asked me about the Anaheim card getting canceled. Obviously being close is, I'm going to the Bellator event, it's Fedor fight, but with the UFC event here being the same night and that getting canceled, he traveled with me to New York when I came and visited Ed up there for my birthday. And the bottom line is, if that wasn't at Madison Square Garden, where they probably paid a huge fee to get the arena, that event would have been canceled. I'm convinced that if that was Anaheim, 230 would have been canceled. So it's just, and I was trying to explain to him that, he's a newer fan over the last couple of years, and the UFC just has done a horrible job of building stars. It wasn't like there's more champions now than ever. So there's not really an excuse not to be able to come up with championship fights. The problem is when the champions are booked, there should be no reason Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler couldn't headline a pay-per-view. If you're doing your job as a promoter, that fight should be able to be a headline of a pay-per-view. The UFC sold Keith Jardine versus Rampage. They sold twice. They sold Vanderlei versus Franklin non-title fights. Matt Hughes versus Thiago Alves headlined a pay-per-view. I could go on and on. I mean, it's not like the UFC was built on a huge, but back then they would still get 300,000 views.
Plus, they weren't doing it, but there wasn't a UFC every weekend back then either. I think that they're overshooting their load. I mean, trying to have an event it's almost every weekend that there's something going on UFC related, to the point that even you and I have lately, Matt, have like not realized something was going on. I think it was like 2 episodes ago. We were like, wait a minute, that's this weekend.
Yeah, but if you think about it, I mean, you had a guy like Keith Jardine headline a pay-per-view. There should be no point where somebody like Ben Askren, if promoted correctly, and I know he hasn't fought in the UFC yet, so maybe he's not the greatest example, but Robbie Lawler, let me throw him out there. Keith Jardine was probably more popular at that point of his career to the mass MMA world, and I know a lot of it had to do with the Ultimate Fighter at the time being huge, but you can't have that. You gotta be able to have an event where it does not necessarily, I mean, a 5-round fight between Askren and Lawler is huge. And I throw in their names out, Covington should be your heel. He should be able to headline a pay-per-view. You might not sell 300, 400,000 pay-per-view buys, but you're still making a profit if you sell 150. I mean, it shouldn't be worth canceling an event over and them all of a sudden acting like it's not UFC quality, because historically it's not like every event's loaded. I think Cyborg and Nunes, this upcoming event on the 29th, I think that's almost wasted at this point. Nobody's talking about it. There's no promotion. It's probably the biggest women's fight in the history of MMA.
Yeah, that's like not that far away. You're right.
And that could have easily headlined Anaheim. They're both, I think Nunes is Southern California. I know Cyborg is right around here. That could have easily headlined that event. Cyborg would have sold thousands and thousands of tickets for the Honda Center. I mean, that would have been so easy to do. I think it was obviously a backup for if John Jones screws up again, which he could still do. It's not. We still got 9 days to it. But
Christmas is right around the corner. It's broken out, man.
I just feel like they've done a horrible job of creating stars and getting people's faces out there. A guy like TJ Dillashaw, I know they had to move him over to this thing. I don't think the viewership's going to be great for another subscription thing. TJ Dillashaw is the kind of guy, he should be the face everywhere.
Yeah, they put him on Brooklyn, yeah.
When I go to a gas station and there's a monster, there should be TJ Dillashaw. When you go to a UFC event, you should see TJ Dillashaw. The guy's a great champion. He's well-spoken. He's done he's polite, at least publicly. I don't know behind the scenes all the crap that goes on. But, it's just one of those things where these guys should be, Eddie Alvarez should have been a huge name. And I know he is to us, but not to the girl who goes to the bar and used to know half the fighters on a UFC card 15 years ago. It was just such a different, and I know, like you said, there was less fights, and that's the other thing. It's like you move on to the next one. Nobody's sitting here analyzing. Let's say it was the first time you ever saw Barboza fight. Nobody's going back now and watching YouTube fights of Barboza to catch up on his previous 25 fights in his career. Everybody's going, okay, well, how am I going to watch UFC 229? I just feel like you don't have that.
There's definitely no buzz around it. That's something good that you brought it up. We're still talking about. Well, actually, we didn't even talk about it. We mentioned Al Iaquinta, but obviously he won the main event last weekend. I feel like more people should be talking about him and Ferguson, or him and whatchamacallit, because he said he wanted, because I know he made the argument that Conor wants a rematch with Khabib, but he wants, obviously, I know Conor and Khabib can't do anything until they're clear to their troubles, but I don't know. What do you guys think for lightweight's the hottest division in all of MMA, in my opinion. So I don't know, Nolan. What would you like to see for a main event 155 as far as cleaning up the top guys in that division?
Yeah, actually, I posted a tweet that I took 7 of the top fighters and said mix and match these guys, and you can add one name in that you would like to see as well. And yeah, there are a lot of options. People are generating every combination possible of the top 8 or so names in the lightweight division. You couldn't really argue with 90% of the suggestions that I got. I think the no-brainer at this point right now, you have to do Khabib and Tony Ferguson. If they don't at least try to make that fight one more time, I don't know what I can say. Both those, there's not been a guy more deserving of a title shot than Tony Ferguson. The guy's won 1 million fights in a row. He's beaten the who's who, and he's got history with Khabib. It's a fight that we've had the build-up for 3 times and had it yanked away from us. So let's try it one more time. As far as the rest of the division, you got Conor, you've got Nate Diaz, who I kind of put in like a category of their own, where you can really argue, you can put them anywhere. They're almost fights that, while sometimes they do fall in the the rankings or title contention or title picture, they can, no matter who you put either of those guys against, nobody's gonna complain, and it probably would make sense. There's no guy. They could match him up with anybody in the top 10, and it would be a fine matchup. That being said, you start throwing Holloway's name in there. He's also kind of in that category where he doesn't necessarily fit in, but you can place him anywhere. And then you got like the Gaethjes and the Barbozas and the Iaquinta now. So, really, that division, and Poirier, I can't forget about him. So, I'm Conor Poirier, if that's what they're doing next, it seems like that's what they want. I would be fine with that. That's a fight that's a clear-cut #1 contender fight, in my opinion. And then you got, like I said, the guys on the peripheral, like Gaethje, Barboza, Iaquinta. Just mix and match them. I don't think the division's so open right now and so stacked that I'm fine with any of those mix and match matchups.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I guess just on a quick glance, Khabib, Ferguson. I would do McGregor Barboza. I think that would be a hell of a fun fight. I'd do Poirier Iaquinta, and then Gaethje and Lee.
That's actually really good. I like that.
And then I know there's always been some bad blood, right, between Diaz and Pettis. I don't think they ever fought.
No.
So that right there, that's the way. I wouldn't reward Diaz. It looks like they got him ranked 10th right now, but I wouldn't reward him with any of those other things. The other guys have fought way too much, and too many guys have spilt way too much blood up there in the top of that division to fall behind him. So that's kind of what I would do. I don't think they'll do McGregor Barboza. I think that would be possibly a disaster for Conor.
Yeah.
But I feel like as long as Khabib's champion, I don't think Conor gets it back. I think you got to prove you can beat a wrestler, and I don't know. I guess if you did McGregor, Iaquinta, but nobody wrestles. The only people that wrestle really is the wrestlers are people like Askren and Khabib, and certain guys who only wrestle. These other guys fall in love with punching. Yeah, no,
you're right about falling in love with punching, but I also think when you step away from this sport, especially with mixed martial arts, the way the sport evolves, like Conor was very good and then he left. to do the Mayweather McGregor thing, and now he came back and it's all he's got a bunch of tough fights that they may even be too tough for him versus when he left. I don't know if you agree with that, Nolan, but the way these. I mean, you've covered and interviewed so many young prospects. You can see these guys. You can spot a guy that's going to hold a title within 5-6 years now when you see these young guys coming out of the blue.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny you bring this up. I was actually talking the other day to somebody about, what will McGregor's legacy be for what he did in the cage? I mean, obviously he transcended the sport as a whole. He had so much extracurriculars. He brought a lot of eyes to the sport. He was exciting. He went on a title run. He won 2 belts first, at the same time. Now he's in a position where he's lost 2 out of his last 4 fights, and he arguably, he doesn't have many easy matchups. There aren't many guys that I would pin him against and say, I feel very confident in picking Conor McGregor in this fight. So it's kind of interesting to see how this is going to play out and how his legacy is going to be for his in-cage abilities as well, because, he's gone from being a guy that, was the double champ, unbeatable, inside everybody's head, to a guy that has had, one title defense or no title defenses, excuse me. And it's kind of a confusing legacy. So this is definitely not, this could make or break his legacy in terms of, being an all-time great fighter that we talk about as being, a pound for pound great of all time. I think these next couple of fights, obviously he's a terrific fighter no matter what happens, but I'm talking about taking that step where people throw his name out there with the John Jones or the Anderson Silvas or the Jose Aldos or the Dominic Cruzes, that type of a name.
Yeah, it's just a tough thing. He beat a young Dustin Poirier. Poirier is obviously a huge improvement. He beat a young Holloway, and those guys are top of the division, so you can't discredit Conor for it. But at the same time, it's like he came along right at it was a perfect storm for him, especially at 145 coming up. I've been saying it, though. I mentioned it for him fighting Kenta. If I could pick one fight for him, I think he deserves to give if Aldo's willing to come up to 155, I think he deserves to give Jose Aldo another shot. I think that's the one fight that before he gets a rematch, Conor does, I think he deserves to give Aldo one. So if Aldo's able to beat Moicano and doesn't want and wants to come to 155, that's the fight that I would make. And then if Conor's able to beat him at that point, just do whatever you got to do for the UFC to make money. If they want to give McGregor, Habib, or Ferguson, or whoever's the champ, that's fine. But I think he owes it to Aldo. Especially now that I think McGregor's going to see how quickly legacies can go. I feel like he deserves to give all. I feel like he would be begging for that opportunity if he was one punch KO'd. In any of his fights. I mean, he's begging for an opportunity after getting slaughtered over 4 rounds. It seems to me that he should give him that chance and at least put a final nail in the coffin of that rivalry. Even though it was only 9 or 13 seconds, it was a talked about fight for a long time before it happened. So I don't know, but
I totally agree with you on that one. I mean, if you would ask me a month after Aldo and McGregor fought at UFC 194, I would have never thought that I would want to see that fight again. Like, I felt like it was real, passing of the guard. And we had all this build up and it lasted so quickly. But now it's like, they're both like what I was saying earlier. They're both these guys that while they don't necessarily fit specifically in a certain place in their division, you can put them against anybody and nobody's going to complain. So they might have, meet in the crossroads here. And it's a fight that would make sense right now. Nobody could argue and say that the matchup doesn't make sense or financially or doesn't make sense logistically or rankings wise or whatever you want to call it. So I would be totally, totally down to see that matchup right now. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's so true,
And not to mention it's a non-title fight that can headline a pay-per-view.
Yeah. It would
something that the UFC needs right now. I mean, Conor's one of their stars who's not a champion, and as long as he's willing to fight, I think you really want to take advantage of that to help fill in these cards. So
yeah.
But like Poirier's not the same guy. Holloway's not the same guy. Obviously, Dustin Poirier got his black belt after his loss to Conor McGregor. So obviously his submission game is up. He's obviously evolved as a mixed martial artist. Same goes for Holloway. What was that? I forgot how many years ago the fight was, but Conor still does the same
5
thing.
years.
Yeah, 5 years. So we know Conor, like, if you watch a Conor McGregor fight, everybody knows, oh, he's got the left straight. He does the low kick to make you drop your hands. You know what I mean? He's got a decent sprawl. He drills very well. Especially if he knows your attack chain, like he drills that very well. But I don't see him doing anything new like these guys have. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like I feel like if they run it back, especially if him and Poirier run it back, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Conor was the underdog against Khabib. I would think the odds would be different if in a rematch between them two.
Yeah, and even like you said, like offensively, you know McGregor's tendencies, you know what his game plan is, but you also, I feel like his aura of invincibility that he had when he fought Poirier, that he was the guy that calls all his shots, and you got to take him at face value because he's never been wrong. That's kind of out the window too. He breathes and he gets hurt and he taps out to a tight neck crank as much as anybody else would. So I think there's a certain amount of confidence that would go, especially with Poirier, who was openly saying after the fight that McGregor was, had real estate inside his head. So I think that there's a lot of truth to what you just said.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is mentally. Poirier was still kind of a younger fighter. I know he had been known, but he was a name at the time. It was probably the biggest name Conor had fought up until that point. But to me, it's like since then he's been through some just unbelievable wars. He's pushed his body to the brink. I just feel like it's more of a mental thing. Where the first fight with Conor, it's not completely fresh in my mind, but I feel like it was kind of like he got beat up a little bit and like he just kind of checked out of the fight. It was a TKO finish, but it just seemed like, and Conor hit him, don't get me wrong, but it was kind of a fight where you when it ended for me, I remember being disappointed kind of in Poirier's performance, thinking like he's got more in him than that. We've even earlier in his career, we had seen it in some of his fights. So I just think mentally now he knows where he can go. I think the same thing with Max. Max was a young fighter, probably, he's won 13 in a row now. That confidence and that level of assuredness that you're going to get through anything he throws at you. You might be on, limping across the ring or bouncing around like Fedor Fujita, but you have that confidence that you're going to regroup yourself and come back in a fight, and you're never going to give up. And I think we've seen that certainly out of Poirier. I mean, the wars he's been in with Gaethje and Alvarez twice. So I'd love to see it. I think the UFC is dropping the ball huge if they don't do Woodley Covington. I just feel like the hype for that fight and the smack talk between the two of them. I think they're dropping the ball if they try to do Usman. I think you're dropping a chance at really kind of a super fight, and not a super fight in the sense that we're used to, but a fight that's been built up and could do real well and would be a fun fight for anybody who's really kind of followed their saga. So.
And it's an earned fight, you know what I mean? It's not like Covington, he talked more, so he's skipping over the top 3 contenders to get this shot. Like, this is a fight he earned. He was the interim champion. And it makes sense on the financial side, and a lot of people want to see it. So if they drop the ball on this, man, I'll be more disappointed than I've been in a long time in them.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I got the rankings up here. Then you get to middleweight real quick, and obviously we got the Gastelum and Whitaker fight. That division's kind of in a weird place because Romero's #1 contender, but you're not really going to do Romero Whitaker 3 at any point. We kind of get this BS rumor of Adesanya and Silva. If Silva wins, he gets a title shot. Obviously, that's not earned. It's a career lifetime achievement award, like we've seen with some other fighters. But that division seems kind of in a really weird place with Weidman's losses and I mean Jacare, I guess, is the #1, but he's got his loss to Romero. That's always going to be there, and I don't know where do you see that division going?
I mean, personally, I think this is an example of why super fights should be held until they're at a point where they're absolutely needed, because the middleweight division was thriving when Michael Bisping first won the belt.
Yeah.
And, his holding the belt and doing the Dan Henderson, not really a super fight, but a fight outside of the norm. And
it was the lifetime achievement. It's basically the same thing we would get.
And then he does the super fight with GSP, and it just all the contenders like round robined each other of eliminating people for years in advance of, well, he beat him and he beat him in a title shot, so who are we going to give it to? So it's in kind of a weak spot right now. I'm hoping that it rebounds. Adesanya, obviously a fresh face that will, if he beats Silva and they want to give him a shot, that extends 6 more months where these guys, the rest of the division, can kind of figure things out. But I mean, we've got Chris Weidman, who's pretty much, on the just declining through the rankings. We got Gastelum, who's getting his title shot. Jacare, like you said, still has the loss to Romero, but Romero has 2 losses to Whitaker. So it's really a tough spot right now. I think people always like to dump on the heavyweights and light heavyweights, saying that, it's kind of a shallow division. But in terms of the title picture right now, middleweight's kind of creeping up there, and I'm hoping things change to where it doesn't get to that point.
Do you think a dominant champion like with a string of wins fixes the division?
I think it could certainly help. We've seen instances where it's hurt as well. I mean, in general, like, I think having a champion that holds a belt for a long period of time usually is beneficial, but then you start running into problems like, Demetrius Johnson, where how many times can you see him fight Joseph Benavidez, or Ronda Rousey, where, I know the Holm fight obviously did huge for them, but before that, it was getting to the point where it was like clockwork, where it was like, Alexis Davis, things like that. So I think you got to find the happy medium. I think a strong division with a champion that continues to win is obviously the ideal scenario, because you can always have, and that's what, like when McGregor, if he had stuck around at featherweight, or if he had kept his belt at lightweight, we would have been having that issue now where you start having these matchups. You could have done Frankie versus Conor. You could have done Max versus Conor, the rematch. You could have done a number of different fights. So I think you got to find the happy medium. But as we know in MMA, most times things aren't perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of that's kind of where the light heavyweight division has been kind of weird, because obviously you have DC right now, and Jones ran that division forever, and now Jones is coming back for the real title, right? They're stripping DC of the belt as soon as that bell rings, correct? With Gustafson and Jones. So if Jones wins that, then the light heavyweight division is the same thing. I mean, I feel like Jones might end up hiding in a division where he's fighting Latifi, and I mean, the Anthony Smith is no joke, but I don't know if we're at a place where we can really put him. He's got, I don't know. He's right there, but an Anthony Smith John Jones pay-per-view, although it's John Jones, seems like a weird. It just seems like that division's just to me Jones has to go to heavyweight if he wants to really continue a dominant legacy as far as building a resume, at least.
Sure, yeah, and I was going to say to kind of piggyback off of something we were just saying, if I'm one of these top middleweights that is kind of backed into a corner right now, like Weidman or Rockhold or Jacare, I might think about trying to move up to 205. I mean, I have the name recognition. One win against a ranked fighter would probably break me into the top 10. That's something that I would consider if I'm one of those guys. Like Rockhold has had tough cuts. Weidman hasn't had easy cuts. They've both talked about 205 in the past, so maybe we'll see one of those names move up and try to use their name recognition and the promotability to get some big fights and get some big wins and get a title shot.
It seems to be working for Santos. Thiago Santos now number 7 in that division, and I don't think he ever broke the top 10 at middleweight, or I don't think he broke the top 12 or 13. So
right.
No, he said he actually said that one of his not the most recent win, but I think like the last fight after, he said that weight class is definitely his weight class now. But and we're coming close to the end of the hour here. I know I said I wanted to ask both of you guys. I mean, for 2019. Is there something you want to see go away, or something you're looking for you'd like to see from the sport as a whole? Like me personally, I'd like to see less, or probably not even hear about interim title fights anymore. I think there should be a different way to fix it, but I don't know. What do you guys? What's your Christmas wish for 2019 for the sport of mixed martial arts?
My Christmas wish for 2019 is that I hope ESPN comes in and they surprise everyone with making the pacing a little bit better, kind of grabbing it by the horns. We understand that, you don't have to put 12 fights all in a row so your program only lasts 2 hours. At the same time, if they came in and they limited it even an hour, short it down 45 minutes, I think that a lot of people would have a much more positive reaction to the fight nights that usually last, God knows how long. So that's my wish. I'm hoping that ESPN, I don't know if you guys checked it, but the first few ESPN events are actually listed at all different times. Yeah. So like the first one's listed at 10, which is normal. But then there's the Fortaleza cards listed to start at 8 Eastern. And then the one after it, the one in Phoenix, it's going to be on Big ESPN, is listed at 9 o'clock. So I think they're experimenting a little bit to see maybe with the viewership and stuff. So hopefully they can maximize our enjoyment during these cards and make it a little bit easier for us East Coasters to watch.
Yeah, man. What about you, Matt?
Oh, well, it's January 26th is 2019, right? So Fedor winning the Bellator heavyweight championship would probably be one of the highlights in 25 years of following the sport for me, considering where he was down at one point.
I had a feeling you're gonna open with that.
You know, I mean, if I had a perfect story, I would say that this Ryzen event goes off. Japan MMA really picks up, gets behind Ryzen. I know they're talking about doing 12 events a year. I'd like to see Fedor win the Grand Prix and then somehow get down to a matchup with Crow Cop in a double retirement fight. the open weight Grand Prix champion from Ryzen against Fedor in a double retirement match, maybe next New Year's Eve, before the year ends, and the glitter comes from the sky, and and maybe it ends in a draw, and you know, I don't know, but
double
something like
knockout.
that. You know, for me, the Japanese MMA scene is something that I've always loved, and when it's not here, it feels like we're missing a part of the sport that really could add even if you don't take it seriously, the entertainment value that it can lend is something that I think is really needed in a time when events can be cookie cutter and stuff like that. So
definitely
that would be my wish, that Ryzen takes off, Fedor wins the Grand Prix.
Shout out to Lee Daly. The Fall of Pride book. If you haven't read it, pick it up. All right, Nolan, before we close the show, why don't you just let us know where we can read all your stuff and where to follow you and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me at MMA_Kings on Twitter. You can follow my work at FloCombat and Tapology. We're doing a lot of big things on FloCombat. That's where my breaking news is going now. I'll be doing a lot of prospect features going into 2019. And then as far as Tapology goes, look for Tapology I know it's been building and it seems like the site's expanding, but I think we've really only scraped the surface of the features that you guys are going to be able to see in 2019. I think there's the two guys in charge, Steve Kelleher and Greg Sachs, have a lot in store. They're thinking every day on how to make the site better, and I think come a year from now we'll be talking again, I'm sure, and we'll be able to talk about a lot of changes that we made that impacted the MMA community in a positive way. So that's where you can find my work, and I appreciate you guys having me on. I always love chatting with you both, and will I be seeing you at Mohegan, Ed?
I hope so.
Okay, man, I'll be there. I'll be there if you're there.
All right. All right. Matt, why don't you shut it down for us?
Yeah, everybody can follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter. Follow myself at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter and at Carbeerzol on Instagram. Obviously, next Tuesday is Christmas. We're looking to record with one of our BJJ gurus, Ray Robles, and get that out next week. He really wants to go over the no-gi worlds that took place this past weekend, and he's got a ton he wants to talk about in the world of jiu-jitsu. So look forward to getting that out next week for everybody right after the holidays. Until then, if I don't talk to you guys, have a great Christmas, and especially you, Nolan, have a great New Year's. And let's hope we're all talking on Twitter, watching Ryzen on DAZN for $9.99 a month.
All right. Peace.
Take it easy.